700 WLW podcast. Catch Scott Sloan weekdays at 9:06 on 700 WLW.
Hey, it's Sloaney back at it on the big one, 700 WLW, after a crazy day here. Certainly following what's going on in Columbus, and this morning we start with this. Gleb Tsipursky is an assistant professor at Ohio State University and is in the president of Intentional Insights and studies decision sciences there, where he teaches. And obviously we're all concerned about what happened in OSU, so you're trying to get answers this morning. But one of the things I noticed yesterday is in all the tweets that the university sent out saying run, hide, fight, I was watching a report. And they kind of touched on it briefly. Obviously, it's still in the phase of trying to get the details out. In that a large number of people, the reason they tweet that is because people forget the training. And joining me about this on the big one this morning is Gleb Tsipursky. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, great to hear you again, Scott. Glad to be on the show again.
Yeah, sorry, obviously thoughts and prayers to those at OSU affected, everyone affected there by this. But, you know, you see this on occasion, unless you're a highly trained member of the military, a police officer, or a pattern of behavior is ingrained in you. For most average folks like me and you, a lot of people, I don't know what the percentage is, but a number of people, when faced with a tragedy, a crisis, we've seen the deer in headlight syndrome, where there's an active shooter situation and people just freeze and wind up becoming targets. There are stories about airline crashes, minor ones that were relatively survivable, where half the people would get off the flight and others were found dead in their seats, overcome by the poisonous gases that simply forgot how to undo their seatbelt. And that brings up a case like this, where we saw images of students barricaded in classrooms, etc. But what happens in our brains when most people under that fight or flight syndrome freeze up? What happens in our brain during that kind of crisis?
So what happens is a strong release of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and adrenaline, so that's kind of energetic hormone, causes us to run, fight, or freeze. And unfortunately, just ingrained in some of us have the flee or fight response, and some of us have the freeze response. It's one of the three typical responses. And you know what, Scott? You don't know who you are until you're in that emergency situation. You don't know if you're the type of person who flees, freezes, or fights. So you need to know that about yourself, and if you're the type of person who freezes in situations where you should run or you should fight, that's a natural instinct that you just gotta fight, that you just gotta train yourself out of. And Ohio State did a pretty good job of working with students on the run, hide, and fight response.
Yeah, and but on that note, you said you got to train yourself. How do you know? Can you artificially, I guess, stimulate yourself to find out what your response would be? Is there a way to learn if you are a fighter, a fleer, or a person who just doesn't know what to do, loses their mind, and is the one that's freaking out, causing everyone else to freak out?
Oh, sure. Folks learn that if they look at themselves, they will learn that pretty easily. You know, if you have, let's say, a bully coming at you, are you the type of person who runs or flees or fights? If you have a car that's steering you, that's in the headlights, are you the type of person who will jump out of the way or freeze? You can artificially do that through having a friend surprise you suddenly, and with a attacking thing. Is your impulse going to be to punch him in the face, or to run, or just to freeze? These are things we can learn about ourselves through artificial situations.
Yeah, and there's some training available out there. My friends Debbie and Mike Gardner at the Survive Institute here in Cincinnati, former police officers, academy trainers, been on the show many times, actually do that in settings. For my wife's been through the class as a realtor many times, and they teach people, okay, this is what it's like. And if you get in some of the more, more hands-on and involved classes, they actually do that, where they'll put you in a room, put you in a house, and come at you essentially to find out if you can fight back or not. It's really interesting training. You find a lot about yourself, and also gives, especially ladies, a lot of self-confidence in being able to address a situation in which they're confronted, to be able to fight back. And highly recommended. Anyway, and Debbie and Mike are linked up on my blog at 700WLW.com. But Gleb Tsipursky at Ohio State University, from the Decision Science Department at the Department of History at OSU, talking about fight or flight, and when something like what happened yesterday at OSU happens around you, how you wind up acting. I notice also, too, there's something called, I don't know if you coined this term or not, but it has to do with the the young man who ran the people over, pulled the butcher knife out, the terrorist attack, for lack of a better term, is something called Muslim anxiety syndrome. Can you explain that?
Yes. Yes, so the Muslim anxiety syndrome, it is something I coined. It's something that folks tend to respond with in these sorts of situations where we have a Muslim who attacks others, and that pattern matches to us to other terrorist attacks. Again, we're not sure yet whether this is a terrorist attack, but it does pattern match to other attacks that occurred where there are clear terrorist situations. And what folks tend to do, and this is very natural, this is what my intuitive reactions are, so it's not something that, oh, shame on you for having this, is that we just feel fear of all other Muslims. We feel anxiety around them. And that's what happens. So this anxiety around Muslims from this one person spreads to all Muslims. Now, that's an irrational, stereotypical response. There are millions of Muslims in America, and only a few commit terrorist acts. Again, we don't know whether this was a terrorist act. But this anxiety, because we look at his background, his religious background, it associates to us with terrorism. And it's an irrational mode of thought. There's very, very, very low likelihood of any Muslim you meet being any sort of terrorist. And this is what's called the horns effect, a psychological phenomenon where if we feel negative feelings around one member of a whole, it spreads to the whole thing. So it's present in very many situations.
It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? In that we see a young man, again, another guy who's Muslim, who looks like your stereotypical terrorist of the age, skin color, gender, ethnicity, all that stuff, and it just reinforces that prophecy that, here's another Muslim attacking us on our own homeland, and therefore I am trained by the terrorists to fear Muslims. That's natural. Is it logical or illogical to think that?
It's very illogical. There is no rational basis to think that Muslims are terrorists. Again, there's, a tiny handful of Muslims commit terrorist acts. Just like a tiny handful of white people commit domestic terrorist acts. We have someone on trial right now, Dylan Roof, for shooting up 9 people in the Episcopal Church in the Black.
Or the guy in Texas yesterday, right?
Yes, exactly. So all of these things, we don't think of white people as terrorists because we don't have that mental association, that mental pattern. And there's no reason to think, logical reason, to think of Muslims as terrorists, but our intuitive instincts, the emotional reasoning causes us to do that. And this is emotional reasoning. This is because we feel something is true, we believe it is true. It's the same thing as if we feel we need to take that second piece of chocolate cake, and we take the second piece of chocolate cake, even though we rationally know it's not going to be good for our health.
It's Gleb Tsipursky from Ohio State this morning on the big one, 700 WLW. But if we're at this time, we have the self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's true, is that, we see here we go again, another young Muslim male. Yeah. And it very could well be that he had some sort of mental detachment, like the guy in Texas did. We thought, he went and killed his coworkers because he thought they were all out to get him. It very well could be a psychological component. We don't know, but immediately we think it's terrorism because that's been the pattern, though. So I don't understand how that's illogical. Now, granted, not every Muslim is a terrorist. I think most people agree that. Certainly, if you look at the percentages, the odds are very small, like any group. As you said, white people being serial killers or black people being, robbers, whatever you might have, is we know the likelihood's small. But again, it's based, at least in reality, is because these events happen around the world, and it's all based on people that look like this guy that did this atrocity in Columbus yesterday.
Yes, it does. It does. And so here's the danger. If we look at our Muslim neighbor and we think of, that looks like a terrorist, what happens then? What is the pattern? We have this guy who committed the stabbing in Ohio State, Abdul Razak Ali Artan is his name. And his Facebook page, he was saying that he was really very upset about Americans hurting Muslims and harming Muslims. So he, because of these fears that people experience and express, and the recent wave of hate crimes against Muslims, incites Muslims like this guy to be really upset and commit acts that again, we don't know his exact motivations, but potentially acts of terror. So if we express through acts of hate against Muslims, through the hate crimes that have been really rising against Muslims recently, acts of hate against Muslims, then this will incite more and more Muslims to commit acts of terrorism, acts of hate against white people, and that goes into exactly what you were talking about, Scott, that reinforcing cycle of violence. And the only way to stop that cycle is to recognize that it's our emotional reasoning causing us to feel negative things toward Muslims, that rationally the vast majority of Muslims are not going to commit terrorist acts. And if we keep thinking that they will, and if we keep acting in a suspicious and hateful way toward them, it will induce some of them to commit acts of terrorism. So the way to prevent that is to come together as a community. And, when I look in the street and I look past a Muslim, not hide my face and go away, but say hi to that person, have a community experience, be welcoming, be generous, and not be hateful and suspicious of our Muslim brothers.
Well, you know what, though, on the other side of this thing, I think we're all relatively guarded and suspicious of people we don't know. And if I have a class with a guy like him, or I live maybe in the same dorm or associate with him, I know him based on a personal relationship. Me personally, and I think speaking for most people, the aspect of different cultures, the skin color, all that stuff, religion, that really makes no difference to me. We're both Americans. We're studying at Ohio State, and it sounds to me it's almost like in some way, shape, or form blaming the victim mentality is that the people were suspicious, that he felt this growing suspicion about Muslims who are committing these terrorist acts in the name of their God. It's because of people who are Americans and maybe people who are Caucasians or otherwise look at these guys and go, all right, well, these are the ones committing the terrorist acts. And now he is feeling oppressed and feeling that pressure because of people that look like him that just winds up fulfilling what he's against in the first place. So, I think it takes both sides in this thing, doesn't it? It's certainly not that he was a victim in any way, shape, or form. Tell that to the 11 people that were mowed over by him yesterday.
You're totally right. He's not a victim, and we should not say that he is a victim. What I'm saying is what folks like us can do. White male folks, I am a white male, you're a white male, others are white male. We can go...
I'm actually an Asian woman.
Wow, Scott, you fooled me for all this time.
There you go. Again, it's these harmful stereotypes, Gleb, that really that divide us.
Right.
But yes, yeah.
You're right. So I'm just saying, there is absolutely obligation on the Muslim community, on the Somali community to come forward, and they are. So something that was happening, I just looked at the Somali Facebook page on the Somali University Facebook page at LSU, the Somali Association, and they were saying that we need to come forward, unite together, be together with Ohio State as a whole, and overcome these fears. So it's up to them to come forward, and it's up to us as well. So you were saying, if you have a class with that student, with that guy, what you will know, what you now know after hearing the show, what the folks who are hearing the show know, is that our intuitions is to hide our faces and not associate with folks like this because of the fears.
Yeah.
But you, the audience, since you know this, it is up to you to take more of a step forward and to be more welcoming than you would intuitively feel, than your intuitions and emotions lead you to feel toward Muslims and Somalis and so on. And it's up to Muslims and Somalis to be more welcoming and reach out more than they intuitively feel as well. So for the Somali and Muslim population who are listening to the show right now, it's up to all of us to make more of an effort than we intuitively feel to overcome those natural but illogical instincts that cause us to fear and hate each other.
Gleb Tsipursky at The Ohio State University, thanks for the time. I'm glad everyone's back to the business of studying and teaching, and hopefully can move on from this. Gleb, thanks again for the time. Good to talk to you.
Great to talk to you.
All right, there you
Thanks
go. We'll
again.
check your forecast coming in about 4 minutes, and a lot of people want to talk about this issue. I get what he's saying, that if you look at the Muslim population in America, now, not around the world, but in America, and you look at the Muslim population as a whole, it is like, for example, it would be like taking 3 Paul Brown stadiums full of people, maybe 4 Paul Brown stadiums full of people, and picking one terrorist out of that group of people. Could you just, by looking at the pictures of everyone in the crowd of four Paul Brown stadiums, pick out a terrorist? The answer, of course, would be no. But essentially, that's what we're talking about here. However, the terrorists all look like the people in that stadium.